Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Igor Lesko. Well, at this point in time, Dr. Igor Lesko. So that happened in November. Yes. Well, this is actually, and this is a conversation starter because this is what they do in the Netherlands. That's a Dutch convention, apparently. No? Well, that's how it was explained to me. So like in the Netherlands, you use DR in front of your name. Internationally, you use PhD outside of the Netherlands context. Yeah. So I'm in the Netherlands on this land here right now, and that's why I'm using this convention. So it's lovely to see you all here. Just a brief note of thanks to our colleagues here from Global OER Graduate Network for all this organization and for having us here, and also obviously our colleagues from the Han University of Applied Sciences for hosting us here. My name is Igor Lesko, and I come from Open Education Global. So I'm actually wearing two different hats here. So one is Open Education Global, and one is also a former student at Open University of the Netherlands, and now the Global OER Graduate Network alumni. And of course, as a representative of Open Education Global, I do need to say a few words about Open Education Global. I'm currently a co-executive director at Open Education Global. I'm based in South Africa, more specifically in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. And we are an international non-profit organization. This microphone is very low, sorry. We are an international non-profit organization dedicated to advancing or promoting open education worldwide. Our worldwide activities in open education are structured within the three main pillars of our strategic plan, and that includes field building, knowledge exchange, and value co-creation. And we do specific activities within these three main pillars, which means events and various kinds of knowledge exchange activities. Of course, we don't do this kind of work alone. We do it together with the network of our 500 plus individual and institutional members. You can see where we are specifically located at this point in time, or where our members are distributed. We have got lots of members. We also have lots of members in Asia. And also, like on to our colleagues from Vietnam, it's really wonderful to see some of these developments in Vietnam, especially that were discussed by our previous speaker here. Because actually, when I started working for Open Education Global, which at that point in time was Open Courseware Consortium, that was my first international trip with our organization, was to Hanoi for the Open Courseware Global Conference in Hanoi. Yeah, so it's very wonderful to see some of these developments, and especially some of the policy level developments, and even that question about, the question is not if to open, but actually how to implement. Yeah, so that's wonderful. A couple of things that I would like to mention that are coming up right now. One, it's the Open Education Global Conference. There's been a lot of discussion coming up over the past few weeks. On this specific topic, we have consulted a community. We had consultations also with our co-organizing entities, which is MIT, Open Learning, and the Open Low-Cost Educational Resources Council in Massachusetts, and also with our board of directors and team members. And just to let you know, the outcome of all of these consultation processes are that the conference is moving forward in a hybrid format. Basically, there is going to be an in-person gathering at MIT, and there's going to be also online participation, allowing participants to connect remotely, but to also present remotely. And in addition to that, there are also going to be some in-person gatherings that the community wants to organize. We heard that too, but these are going to be organized by the community themselves, and these are going to be really around the core conference programming. And from our side, we will provide some limited support in terms of amplifying those events. So stay tuned. The conference website and also the call for proposals are launching in the next few days. And of course, Open Education Week. It's another thing that is coming up as of next week. This is another big event that we organized or help coordinate at Open Education Global. The next Open Education Week is from March 2 to 6. The call for contributions is still open. So if you are organizing any specific events, or if you have some specific resources to share, please go to the website and submit them so that we know that you are organizing them, and we are going to amplify them from our side. Many of you are already organizing numerous events, and we do appreciate it. And Han has been also a really great supporter of those activities. So yes, your continued involvement in those activities is really important to showcase the breadth and depth of the movement worldwide. Okay, do we have a microphone here somewhere that I could use maybe? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah, this is much better. Okay. And now I would like to actually talk about the topic that I actually came to here to talk about, and that's really related to driving OER sustainability and the role of policy and champions. This specific presentation is based on my PhD thesis that was recently defended, as I've mentioned, in November, titled Prepare for the Long Run, Strategies for Affecting Governmental OER Policy Developments by International Organizations. This is the final product, by the way. This is what it looks like. So I have got a couple of copies here still with me that I can give out. I've got another 2 copies, I think, coming in on Thursday. If you are interested to have one of those, please let me know after the presentation. But otherwise, you can also get hold of it online. It's openly licensed, so I've shared the links to all of those assets in a Dropbox folder. You can watch the PhD defense, and you can also get a PDF of the thesis and presentation slides. All right. So as the focus of my research, basically what I was doing as part of my research, so most of this presentation is going to be based basically on the PhD work I have done. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I did, how I did it, what were some of the main results, and what are some of the closing reflections. So the main goal really of my research was to explore how international organizations influenced the governmental open educational resources policy developments in a specific time frame from 2002 until 2019. And the reason why I did that is because, first of all, international organizations have been playing an important role in advocating for and supporting the development of governmental open educational resources policies and setting international policy agendas. However, there has been a limited empirical evidence on how IOs influence governmental OER policy processes, in basically like in what kind of actions they were taking to that end, right? And how effective their approaches were. From the position of the organizations themselves, but also from the positions of governmental representatives worldwide. So that was the identified empirical gap. But also, I believe on a personal level that education is a driver of personal and professional development and growth. And of course, OER and OER-related practices are essential enablers. And in one way of ensuring sustainability of open educational resources and related practices is through governmental policy. And of course, I have been passionate about this subject for many years. Essentially, really on a deeper level, this research is about strategies or what can we really do to ensure that governments continue opening and supporting education that is open and inclusive and available to all. Yeah. So what I've done is basically I've conducted literature review, developed conceptual frameworks of IO's OER policy instruments and governmental OER policy instruments. These conceptual frameworks guided the data collection and analysis processes. The IO's OER policy instruments framework is basically about the types of actions that international organizations take to influence governmental policy developments. And I'll just fast forward to this slide. I'll come back to the previous one. So this is an example of the policy frameworks of international organizations. So you see, like, for example, when the international organizations decide what actions they can take, they can do the discursive dissemination, which is basically all kinds of knowledge sharing, ideation, production of various reports, studies, that sort of things. Standard setting instruments, these are typically related to conventions or recommendations. One example of that would be, I don't know, UNESCO recommendation on OER from 2019, which is a standard setting instrument. It's not as strong as in terms of compelling countries to do anything, but certainly the countries need to report on what they are doing with respect to OER at 4 years. And it's the only sort of standard setting instrument in this space related specifically to OER. Financial means is self-explanatory, providing funding, coordinative functions, that's really related to monitoring progress or compliance with specific types of instruments. And technical assistance instruments are various forms of capacity building initiatives, various forms of policy advice, for example, that can be done, provision of model or model policy documents, legislations, and the like. Yeah. So these are the sorts of actions that typically IOs can take to influence governments in their policy approaches. So that's that. That's the conceptual framework of IO's OER policy instruments, and the governmental OER policy instruments is slightly different. So this is what it looks like. And this was also adopted on the work of earlier practitioners. And basically, public OER policy instruments, in the same way that IOs have the specific actions to influence governments, governments also have specific instruments, policy instruments at their disposal to address specific objectives. The reason why I decided to go the route of policy instruments as opposed to just using the blanket term policy or governmental policy is that because the term was really used interchangeably and in various ways by different scholars in the field, and it was not really helpful because when some people were speaking about governmental policy, they would be talking about, I don't know, provisional funding. Some people would be talking about legislation. Some people would be talking about regulation. But this specific instrument or this specific framework actually introduces more nuance into the discussion in terms of what we are talking about, right? So as part of this research, I really wanted to know what kind of policy instruments governments have adopted or implemented in respective countries, states, and provinces, and what influence international organizations had on those along the way. So this was part of the literature review process and the development of the conceptual frameworks. Additional area of research that was involved was the desktop research of documents. So I've reviewed over 2,000 documents for international organizations and documented 164 examples of policy instruments. They are all here. It's also available online. There was also a paper published from one of those chapters related to intergovernmental organizations, and you can also get all of that available there. And I've also documented 134 examples of governmental OER policy initiatives worldwide. All right. And as far as interviews, so I've done a few interviews with people. There was 15 with representatives from 8 international organizations that included intergovernmental organizations such as UNESCO, Commonwealth of Learning, European Commission, OECD, and INGOs as well, such as Creative Commons, OER Africa, OER Asia. And then 35 interviews with policymakers, advisors, and experts in 33 countries, states, and provinces. Right? So you can see the scope was quite big, and I just want to really share some of the main results from here in terms of how IOs have been influencing governments in their policy approaches from 2002 to 2019. Their activities ranged from constructing and diffusing ideas about OER and open education policies to providing funding and policy support and to issuing standard-setting instruments, which includes UNESCO 2019. They placed their successes primarily in the area of setting international policy agenda as one area, and second, influencing policy, setting the topic on the agenda of policymakers, and then also helping with the sort of policy formulation processes in several countries, primarily. Here are some examples of the governmental OER policy initiatives that were implemented during this period. As you can see, the most frequently used instruments were the information type instruments, which are various forms of examples in terms of press releases, in terms of various types of resources that the governmental departments were producing related to the topic. But also as far as the regulation legislation is concerned, it was less about, only just about half of them reported adopting like specific explicit regulation or legislation with respect to OER. Most of those that were in the realm of legislation or regulation were part of indirect strategies. So they would be incorporated within broader policy frameworks. And this would be like, ICT and education policy, educational reforms, digitization strategies, as was mentioned in Vietnam and others. Also, combination of direct or indirect funding programs, most frequently used in combination with different types of information instruments. Yeah? So these are just the examples. The part of trying to find out what's happening in different countries was to have a bit more validity to verify that when the government representatives are talking about these initiatives, that actually they are talking about OER-related initiatives, and it's not something related to e-learning or that sort of things, right? And as already mentioned, then I've done some interviews with policymakers, advisors, and experts in different countries. And 28 respondents basically have identified the influence of international organizations on different processes of the policy cycle, and that included agenda setting, policy development, in some cases implementation processes. And they identified instruments by the governmental policymakers where funding, regulation, and information. The most frequently cited international organizations as having had influence, no surprises there, were UNESCO, Commonwealth of Learning as well. It also included different international non-governmental organizations, but also foundations, because foundations are not just giving money, but they're also playing important ideation role in many ways. And one of those examples, for example, would be Hewlett. Not just Hewlett, but also Open Society Foundations, Shuttleworth Foundation, and others. But also, interestingly, other drivers that were of these policy-level initiatives in different countries that were mentioned included local OER champions, or coalitions, or other non-governmental organizations or players within those countries. As far as which instruments or actions of international organizations were perceived to be effective by those governmental policymakers or players, these were those that could help set agenda setting, could help set agenda, or provide legitimacy frameworks and tools for local initiatives that could help raise awareness or facilitate knowledge exchange about the topic, build communities and networks, and support evidence-informed policy making, and provide financial tools, financial support for policy initiatives. So within this broader range of activities, the most effective types of policy instruments include declarations and recommendations, organizing conferences, supporting networks, engaging in advocacy, issuing policy reports, providing policy advice, and then funding. Yeah, so these are the most important instruments, identify those players in order to advance policy level agenda. So the key points, I know that I'm coming to an end, I think, with my time. So just the key point is that international organizations really helped get countries get OER and open education on the policy agenda, but the actual impact was also very dependent on the local champions, OER champions, who could help translate those international commitments and guidance into local policy context or concrete actions. Basically, that was one of the elements that I've learned, which was a surprising finding in some ways, and in many ways it also wasn't, that many of the policy level initiatives in many different countries, states, and provinces were driven by local players, local champions, so to speak. We have been speaking about champions in some ways today as well. These are, people also based at different institutions. Many of you are individual champions who are trying to make a difference, right? But insofar as you are trying to move policy level initiative, the step from an OER champion to a policy entrepreneur in this space, which is a term that I'm using from literature, right? Policy entrepreneur is someone who exploits the window of opportunity to pitch policy solutions. And in this context, you'll be using arguments such as OER and open education as a potential solution to a specific objective or challenge that the government is facing. So it was the role of those champions that was quite instrumental in many different countries. And we also learned that when these individual champions left or stopped working in their positions, the sustainability of these initiatives was undermined quite quickly. And that's worrying. So that was one of those elements that was also highlighted through this research, that in terms of recommendations on how international organizations could support governments more effectively in their policy approaches, is to provide more support for policy implementation, but also to help build local expertise and help identify local OER champions. I'm also using the terminology of policy entrepreneurs in this context. And there would be a little bit more work necessary to define the desirable attributes of policy entrepreneurs in the space of OER and open education. Another important recommendation that was made was related to the alignment of international instruments with local contexts and priorities. This is something that policymakers need help with often, just because there is an international instrument that was issued that looks good, such as declaration, recommendation, whatever it may be. Policymakers often ask, like, what am I supposed to do with this? You know, like, I've got so many issues to deal with. And so that kind of help is also necessary. This is where the role of local players, people like you, makes a difference. You know, when you have connection to your policymakers, you can make these kinds of arguments. Another important element that was mentioned was that strengthening evidence base is still very important. Yeah, and I said here, like, you know, role for GoGN. This is just like post-viva. This is not part of the research process. But yes, this is something to think about, because it really came up as an issue. Providing systemic evidence about the impact of, or the difference that OER and open education practices are making is really important. It helps feed appropriate advocacy strategies as well. Right? Without that kind of continued evidence, international organizations are thinking, well, what are we supposed to do next? We don't really know. Like, you know, what should be our action? And policymakers within governments, they really do enjoy evidence-informed policy-making processes, and they do need that kind of information for their support. And then finally, really just, you know, it's important to reframe the advocacy. Maybe this is something, and this is actually something more in a nutshell, that we as a community need to think about how we are framing open education type advocacy for the movement sustainability, because there is a bit of an existential crisis that we see here for different reasons. And then consider the importance of open education within the broader ecosystem, which is open access, open data, open research, and so on. So affecting policy level making processes at the governmental level, it's a long process. And so you do need to prepare for a long run. Some people have been working on this for decades, and some people here, even in this audience. But the important part is really to celebrate and to acknowledge policy wins alongside with numerous setbacks. It's still, well, this is more of a visual thinking at this point in time, because the current situation is a little depressing worldwide, but international organizations' roles still remain relevant for scaling and sustainability, even though their roles are being systematically undermined. But yes, the future does require global cooperation and local champions. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.